Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature successful business leaders, top law firms, green energy companies, and more. Today, we're joined by the Amazon best-selling author, award-winning speaker, the charismatic and gregarious CEO of CyberGuard360, Al Alper. Al, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I saw your eyes following everything you had to say, so you did a hell of a job.
I'm not great with the teleprompter, so I read my words. I got this.
Damn good job.
Can read, check. All right. So before we get into our show, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Cyberlinks is a complete technology solution provider that ensures your business is not only has the most reliable and professional IT service, but also has the right cybersecurity solution to ensure your business stays productive and safe. All right. And now back to our show. Al, thanks for coming on today, buddy.
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right. So you are the, as we said, charismatic and gregarious CEO of CyberGuard360. Can you, for those not familiar with it, can you give us a rundown? What is CyberGuard360?
Oh, man. So we're the be-all, end-all. No, I'm just kidding.
That's right.
So we are a cybersecurity solutions platform that companies like CyberLinks and others avail themselves of to make their clients and customers safer, more secure, and more compliant. In a nutshell. How's that for
that's a very dense nutshell. I love it. And at CyberLinks, we use CyberGuard360. Love it. So if you could, let's break it down, because there is so much packed into CyberGuard360 that really does allow companies like CyberLinks to provide a lot of value to our clients that's otherwise really difficult for them to do. I mean, they're always so busy with their day-to-day that if they don't have some way of doing a lot of the compliance stuff, a lot of the security stuff, it just doesn't get done. So a lot of that's in CyberGuard360. You guys do a great job of that. So can you start breaking that down for us? How's it work?
So when I'll start with like the beginning. In the beginning, there was Adam and Eve. My version of that story is, in the beginning, we had this idea of bringing all of the moving parts of the cyber solution space, right? So if you look at the plethora of vendors out there that provide cybersecurity solutions, you quickly see a couple of glaring problems and holes in the space. First and foremost, not every solution covers all aspects of what it's designed to do. Not because they're not good solutions, but because they have a very narrow focus on what it is they're trying to accomplish. They more typically than not do a good job at it, but there are some fringe elements that they don't necessarily touch upon. The other thing is that they don't talk to one another. And so for a company like CyberLinks, as an example, if you were to assemble all of the moving parts of CyberGuard, you'd have to have solutions from about a dozen vendors cobbled together that you as a provider would have to learn a dozen different UIs and UXs, deal with a dozen different support organizations, and pay the additional burden of overhead for all of the OpEx associated with all the dozen companies that come with it. And so necessarily for you to bring a complementing solution to market cobbled together from other vendors, your costs would be 8 to 10x of what you're paying from CyberGuard. And therefore you'd have to charge 8 to 10x. And you would quickly become non-competitive. Worse than being non-competitive is that your customers would shy away from some of the products, and therefore they would be less secure. And that's really, for us, that's the big problem. Like, we want businesses safe and secure, not just because we want them using our product. Yes, we want them using our product, but because we believe the only way to stop this, I almost cussed, the only way to stop
it's okay.
that BS of from hackers is to make everybody safer. And the sooner we can participate in securing as many businesses as humanly possible, the better off everybody is, because a safer community is a better community for everybody that participates in that marketplace. And so our goal with CyberGuard was to solve those problems. How do we make it affordable to secure your clients? And therefore, we built all of our own solutions from the ground up. How do we make sure that we capture the fringe pieces of solutions that a lot of our competitors in those silos don't necessarily address, if you would, because they're looking at the low-hanging fruit as a way to generate revenue? And then really the 800-pound gorilla that nobody addresses but us, frankly, is how do you look at all of that data at a 30,000-foot level and say, okay, when users behave this way over here and this way over here, this is what happens over here. And so if you, using Cyberlinks as an example, if you were to do that with a dozen products, you would have to export data from this one and this one and this one and this one and this one, dump it all into Excel, spend a weekend doing spreadsheet masturbation on the numbers, and come out with like, okay, this is my client's problem. And you'd have to do that for all your clients. And by the time you finish doing it, they've had days and days of new threat intelligence coming in from all vectors of their organization, and all your data is outdated. Right. And so our job, our goal really, and what we believe our job is to take all of these moving data points and triangulate them so that we can form an opinion as to the risk posture of all of the moving parts of an organization: the users, the policies, the culture of the organization, the endpoints, everything, so that your client CEOs can look at what we call our employee vulnerability index. It's really one of our many CRIS scores that we have. CRIS stands for Cyber Risk Index Score, and say, oh, these employees are an element of risk for our organization that I need to mitigate as a CEO. Today, your CEOs can't do that by using competing products. It just can't be done. There's not enough information. And so we provide that, what I call I call it solving the visibility problem. We provide visibility for CEOs that they just can't get by assembling other competing products.
That's fantastic. That's
a lot, a lot going on there.
It is a lot. I mean, and to be fair, CyberGuard does a lot. So how do we break that down? Can we, kind of go through it? Let's go, because if you look at their, the CyberGuard website, right? Let's say you're brand new to it and you're looking, okay, you've gone to CyberGuard360, you see the different products. I mean, let's start with that. Let's break down the products, see how this all applies, and how does an MSP use these individual products to create that holistic, security solution that you mentioned there.
So we let's just take the variety of products that we have, and then I'll sort of, using what I just talked about, how visibility, and show how those moving parts sort of convey that information, right? So we do dark web monitoring, we do breach analysis, we do simulated phishing. Our policy management modules are rock star. We do penetration tests, we do vulnerability assessments, we do awareness training, we do micro trainings. Our risk assessments are also rock stars. Our cyber resilience assessments are rock stars. So we've got those are a lot of the moving parts of the platform. There's some other things that are under the hood that are less sexy. That saying it out loud is not going to mean much to the audience, right? So if we talk about visibility, and let's talk about how we're able to convey the riskiness or the vulnerability of a user better than other solutions out there. So yes, you can give them awareness training as an example, right? Awareness training is as ubiquitous as air and water. Everybody and their mother offers user security awareness training. The problem with security awareness training, as we see it, is twofold. First and foremost, it's a state in time evaluation of an employee, which means nothing, because and why I say it means nothing is, and I'm sincere about it, is because it's just like high school calculus, right? I got an A+ in calculus in high school. That was long before the gray in my beard, which, by the way, I'm only 26, but this is what marriage will do to you. So long before the gray, and I got an A+ in calculus. I couldn't tell you a damn thing about calculus today. And it's not because I have a crappy memory, and I do. It's because I don't use it. And so even if you got a perfect score on an awareness training test, I would guarantee in 3 or 4 months that user that got a perfect score probably would fail again if you gave it to them cold on the spot. And that's because they use it or lose it. They never use it, and therefore they lose it, right? And so that's why we also offer micro trainings, which are these weekly security shorts, we call them, that get sent out in email. And we track, do the users open them? Open that email, comes by way of email. Do they open them? Do they actually watch them? Or do they just ignore them? Do they speed through them? And so we use that to see, are they keeping security top of mind? So if they got an 80 on their security awareness training test in January and they've watched none of our security shorts and we're now at the end of April, the chances of them passing today are zero, approach zero. If they have been watching the shorts, they'd probably do as well or better than they did in January. And so that's part and parcel of that. We also monitor the dark web. So part of that training is, listen, you can't use company assets off of company property. And if their email address and password show up on the dark web, which, by the way, is owned by your client companies and not by their users, it shows up on the dark web. Two things are true about that. One, they have not paid attention to the training the way they should have, because part of our training tells you why you shouldn't release your credentials on the internet, and never give it away, and you should rotate and things like that. But also our policy module, if they've attested to an acceptable use policy that says that they're not allowed, they are by company policy not allowed to use assets off company property, and their email shows up on Ashley Madison, then they are in violation of company policy, in fact. And we highlight that. And that actually makes them a far riskier employee, because not only are they not paying attention to the training, they're now directly violating what the company has told them to do. HR loves that because HR now has recourse. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, for a CEO who gets that information, and that all gets factored into the employee vulnerability index, for a CEO to have that kind of visibility, because the likelihood of a user to break policy to do anything they want is very high. Mm-hmm. That means if their superiors tell them what to do, the chances of them doing it are very low, or lower than the average employee who otherwise follows company policies. And so they become a very risky employee to the organization and the company. And that level of visibility gives a CEO the actionable intelligence they need to do something before this employee caused them to be breached, or before the employee goes sideways, as I call it. And that to me is utterly invaluable, because I've never met a CEO whose primary concern was whether or not there was hot water in the bathroom. Their primary concern is, how do I mitigate risk? Because it's them that own it. And we provide the visibility for them to mitigate, at least the visibility to make some decisions about risk that they don't get anywhere else. And so maybe, I don't know if I explained that well, but
actually, I think it's great. And the thing that I really like about that is I think it can be really challenging, let's go from my perspective as, from CyberLink's perspective, trying to communicate that to a business owner who is always, while they're constantly weighing that risk, mitigating risk, they're also weighing that against their bottom line. So they're trying to keep costs down as much as possible. And if you can't clearly articulate, how you mitigate this risk, what the risk is and how they can mitigate it, how this empowers them to have better visibility and empowers HR when you've got a high risk employee who you're like, I've been looking to, they've been causing trouble in other areas. Great. This gives us teeth now. So
Correct.
I think these are great things. Yeah, sure. Maybe that doesn't apply to a small business with 5 employees or 10 employees because they don't have an HR department. But for those larger companies that do, to empower them. So I think this is great. Honestly, from the MSP side, this is great sales material. This is great education for guys like me as to, hey, how can we? I'm always looking for that magic combination. What is the magic combination of words I have to tell this business owner for them to understand the risk and take action now? Because I can't tell you how many times we've had clients come to us and then we're like, yep, you need to get this, that, and this. And they're like, okay, yeah, but now's not really the time. We're really busy with this stuff. Let's circle back in, a little later. Okay. But you really need to yeah, we will. Lo and behold, we get a call a few months later, be like, oh shit. Okay. And now they want to do it because there's been a problem. And if only I knew that magic combination of words that could get them to realize that it's now, not later, without fear mongering, right? Because that's the other thing you're always trying to balance is, trying to scare people into security. You want to empower them and give them those tools and make it make sense for them. So I like what you're saying, and I think it helps a lot of MSPs to present that. So what you've currently presented now, that was the PII portion of it, right? That which product are we talking about there? So when they go to the product page, they're looking at CP360, PG360, which by the way, I don't know what they stand for. Wait, oh, I do. It's right. Prospecting, but PG, I don't know what it stands for. It's not under there. So I'm always like, what is that? I got to ask Al at some point.
That's
an
OB360. So I taking my jacket off warmer. Don't get excited.
So we're going to, woo. All right. A few more questions. We're going to get that shirt off.
Maybe.
So if you could, it's Friday. Okay.
I should have a beer. Can I have a beer?
Yeah, please, by all means. Let's do it. We'll pause
we do
the
happy
show,
hour Friday in my office.
There we go. So which product was that you were just talking about? So when people go there, they can see, oh, okay, that's covered under the.
Yeah, that's part of our core PG360 platform.
Perfect.
All of those are part of the core platform, and that's really the single pane of glass through which all the other moving parts of our solutions. So we've got 4 different platforms, so to speak, presently. PG360 is the portal through which all the their sister platforms communicate, because that's also the aggregating point of the data. And so we inform. So OB, which is our technical tool suite for pen testing, vulnerability assessments, breach probability engine, things like that. That sits in OB.
You're not going to tell us what OB stands for, are you? Now you're just messing with me.
It's not an obstetrician, by the way. I might.
Well, that gives whole new meaning to it. I get it now.
Well, penetration testing.
You heard it here first, folks.
It is Friday. And then RA, which is where we do CMMC assessments and HIPAA assessments and FINRA and ITAR and all the other things that are in RA. And then CP, which is our prospecting platform. So where MSPs can use that to prospect, basically reel in new business, so to speak. And there's breach dark web searches and cyber assessments, and there's actually an element in there of CRIS, which is our CRIS 0, which is our breach probability engine. So you can evaluate the exterior of an organization and determine the likelihood of a breach based on their external posture. Nice. It's actually a really powerful tool. Not enough MSPs avail themselves of it, but it's an incredibly powerful tool, an incredibly powerful prospecting tool as well.
Now, which one are you talking about? The vulnerability assessment, or
that's CRIS. In the prospecting tool set, which is part of PG. Mm-hmm. It's a separate platform, but it's built into PG as well. So there's one of those prospecting tools is CRIS. Mm-hmm. It's CRIS 0, actually. It's our first rendition of CRIS, which is that cyber risk index score. And it is a breach probability engine. So we evaluate. So if you were to give us a domain or an IP address or something like that, we actually want both, frankly. We would evaluate and give a score, a FICO-like score from 300 to 850, just like FICO, and we did that intentionally because everybody knows FICO, right? Yeah. As to the likelihood of you being breached. So we evaluate thousands of data points, but in simple terms, we look at externally available information from anything from S3 buckets to bankruptcy to dark web to the vulnerability posture at the perimeter, and then we triangulate that and try to break in, and using the assets found in the public forum. And if we're successful, or the level to which we're successful and the time it takes us to be successful, we can tell you how long it would take somebody to break into your organization, and therefore we can determine the probability of that breach happening. It's a really great tool. I mean, really.
No, it is. And I was going to say that we recently ran our first one just a few weeks ago, and it was actually really fantastic. And I was like, ugh, I should have been doing this, before. It actually creates a really great report that you bring to the prospect or client, and it's really great. And the fact that it is that FICO-like score, I think is fantastic. People really get that. It makes perfect sense. Oh, I'm sitting there, or oh crap, all right, time to start paying my bills on time. Right. So,
well, the funny thing is, you said two things that are really interesting. One is it creates a really nice report you give to your clients. So that statement says a lot about what we do, because if you notice, and I'm sure you have, every report that's created in our platform is not technical. Like, engineers hate our reports, and they hate our reports because they don't have technobabble in it. They want to know which bit and byte went sideways. CEOs could give a crap less. They want to know if it went sideways. That's the only thing they care about, and why. That's it. Yeah. And so that report, you can literally take it as is to a CEO, because it's written for a CEO. It's not written for you. I love you, Matt, but no, it's not written for you.
I appreciate that.
It's designed for your customer to say, oh, crap, I got to do something. And so that's true for all of our reports. Everything we generate is generated with your customers in mind and not you. And I can tell you that some of our partners don't like it. They wish it was more technical. I'm like, listen.
Well,
then you're going to have to create your own report.
That's right. I got to disagree with them, because basically, from my perspective, I feed it a little bit of data, I push a button, and out comes a great report that's already it's got our logo on it, it's got our name on it, it's got the client's information on it, it's got the pretty the pretty graphs, right? Your pretty crisp score. I love, the colors are fun. It works nicely, and it's much more an executive summary that CEOs are going to say, get it, cool.
Right.
They don't want the details. I don't want to, bore them with it, because then you're like Charlie Brown's teacher. They're being polite and waiting for you to shut up, but come on. And there's 100%. None of that in this report. So yeah, no, it's actually really cool, very powerful, and yeah.
Yeah, and I suggest. I recommend running it at least once a year. It's for people that don't do regular penetration tests. It is a tremendous value proposition and a fantastic alternative for those who don't want to go through the cost and/or proctology exercise of a pen test, because you can get an enormous amount of information out of that.
And let's get into that, because that is also something you offer those proctology exams. So let's dive into your pen test.
I'm not talking about my weekend activities, but
yeah, every week at the proctologist now, it's just excessive. I'm sure your proctologist loves it, but still excessive.
I'm the one that wears the white coat.
Sure. No, but seriously, so let's get into your pen test. What's it like? What's it do? What are you testing? How is it different from, say, you Google pen test? There's plenty of groups that offer it. what's the advantage here? What are we looking at?
Sure. So let's start with an understanding that there's no hard definition for penetration test. Just doesn't exist. If you look online, you'll get a lot of opinions, which, like sphincters, everybody has when they all stink, right? But there's no hard. A penetration test is nothing, in layman's terms. It's nothing but an attempt a legal attempt to break in and try to harvest information. That's the extent of it. There are the purists, and I'm not saying they're wrong. There are the purists that, for a penetration test, has to be a white hat hacker. Who is a white hat hacker? For anybody who doesn't know, is a professional hacker, but they don't do it to steal. They do it on behalf of companies for good, to show them where they have holes in their architecture. Okay, and so it's a white hat hacker with an arsenal of tools that attempt to break in. Every one of those tools they use, just about every one of those tools, themselves are arguably pen tests. They just do certain types of penetration tests. And so I'm having that discussion for a reason, because there are going to be people who see this podcast and say, well, that's not a pen test. Again, it may not be the pen test in your mind, because for you, it's a guy with a white hat who has 50 tools that they use, and they try to break in, and they use their own manual skills to do that as well. And yes, we've done those as well. So I'm not saying that's not a great service. And for those who really want to go deep, you need them. That's not what we do. So we're an automated pen test, and our tools evaluate individual assets, typically by an IP address. That's how all assets that touch everything on a network, whether it's the internet or a private network, or at home or in the office, including your cell phone when you turn on your hotspot, is an asset, and get something called an IP address. I know you know all this, but again, for anybody who might be listening, and that IP address is their address. And then we look at that address, and we try to find every open door and window in that house. And then when we find one, we try to break in. And if we get in, we stop and say, hey, we got in, and this is what happened. A pen tester will go much deeper. They'll go in, they'll look for more holes. They'll do, so that's where the white hat hacker comes in. And again, depending on where you're going with depth and what you're looking to do, definitely recommend, hiring somebody like that. And happy to give you names of people that can do that, and several that I know that do a phenomenally good job at it. And our tool would be one of the tools in their toolbox, frankly. Yeah. And as I said, they have a suite of pen test tools. So we do that. We look at the address, the IP address, with that house address of the asset on the network, and we will attempt to we will look under every nook and cranny to find any possible opening that there is, and then we will try to break in.
Nice.
And if we're successful, we'll report it out.
And now,
if we're not, we'll report that out.
Absolutely. And so then you get to, let's say, you get to define that in as the person requesting the pen test, or you could say, hey, I need you to try to I need a pen test for this particular IP address. So let's say it's the office, their firewall, right?
Correct.
Or their website, maybe, right? Or maybe it's both, right? And generally, people want to know: is my website secure? Is my email secure? Is my office secure? That's
Correct.
kind of the extent of it. And now with the, I suppose since COVID, and really, the office has become a lot of home offices and the office, right? A lot more so than it used to be. So how do you go about that? Let's say you've got a client who they've got an office and that needs to be tested, but then they've got a number of employees who work from home. How do you go about getting that? You just get the IP address of that, and of their home address, and do that at that, when you've got that, or do you have an agent that you send out? What are we looking at?
So I'm not going to wear my CyberGuard hat now because that's up to the MSP how they want to do that. So I'm going to wear my hat as if I were I were you. I was an MSP. How would I do that? So first and foremost, running pen tests on home IP addresses are going to find a million holes. That's just a fact. Those home routers are the worst. And so any MSP worth their salt, and no disrespect if it's not you, so I don't mean it in any way, shape. I don't know your answer, so I'm just to say that my opinion, right? And we've already established how much an opinion's worth. So anybody working from home should be operating through the office's VPN. Just what they should be doing. And it should not be on a split tunnel. For those that don't know what that means, is that if you're on a VPN, the only internet you can use is the internet from the office. You can't use your home internet and the internet from the office. The minute you're on a VPN, all internet traffic goes through that office firewall. That, by definition, will shrink the attack surface dramatically. The attack surface are all the exposures on the internet that you have, right? And so if that's happening, you only need to test the firewall.
Good point.
The problem with testing first of all, it will get very expensive very quickly, testing everybody's home IP address. And they are all guaranteed to find major problems. And no one at a home office is ever going to mitigate those problems. It's too expensive. And so it's really a very expensive exercise in futility.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? And that makes a great, argument for this is why you have to have, all of your employees who are working from home on that VPN that's not split tunnel, right? So you've got to have something set up to where it's all secure and coming through, your network, and you have control
Correct.
over it versus them just willy-nilly. Okay, excellent. So that is your pen testing. We've gone over the privacy, the PG 360, a little prospecting. So now risk assessment.
Okay.
I am still curious what OB stands for, but I'm going to let it go at some point. So the risk assessment, RA360.
And obviously RA stands for risk assessment. See, I gave you one, didn't I?
And PG's on there too. CP's there.
Maybe at the end, I'll let you. This will get everybody to stick around till the end until they'll figure out what the hell that's about. So RA360, those are enterprise grade risk assessments. And so if you think about a HIPAA assessment, right? Let's use that as an example. Your basic pediatrician, obstetrician, GP, doctor's office, even if there's multiple practitioners, your typical HIPAA risk assessment for an office that size will be about 90 questions long, and there's a variety of things, and there's a structure to that SRA. A security risk assessment is what SRA stands for, that you're obligated to meet. As you become a bigger healthcare entity and enterprise, you've got to take a much more deliberate and diligent risk assessment. So an enterprise grade risk assessment for hospitals and healthcare providers of scale are about 1,100 questions. They are significantly more detailed. They quite literally are a proctology exam of every orifice in that business. And it is lengthy. It takes hours to complete just the administrative pillar. So for the audience, there are 3 pillars to a risk assessment: administrative, physical, and technical. The administrative assessment, which evaluates the company's posture and culture, is what that Q&A is. And it evaluates what the company believes to be the security posture of their organization. And it evaluates policies, and it evaluates employee evaluation. It evaluates everything as part of that administrative pillar to determine what is the company culture of security in that organization. The physical pillar is actually a physical inspection of plant. Are doors locked? Are there security cameras? Are screen screen? What you know what I'm talking
Screen
about? The
protectors,
privacy
privacy
screens,
protectors.
are they
Yeah.
on there? Are screens facing windows or hallways that people can walk by? I remember I did an RA once of that scale, and I walked into the lobby, and when the CEO came out to meet me, I told him he failed while he was shaking my hand. He's like, "What are you talking about? You just got here." I'm like, "Look through that door," and the conference room was open, which opened to the lobby and opened into the claim center. And I had 3 screens facing me, and I can read the health records of everybody on the screen.
Yep.
That is a violation, and you will be shut. You will do the perp walk for that.
Yeah.
And so, these are the things that a physical inspection is required to go through and evaluate. And then lastly, you have the technical inspection. And that's where you'll go in with all the tools in your toolbox, and you will evaluate the technical posture of the organization, everything from firewall configurations and logs to the hardening of the endpoint to the switch routing and everything in between, right? And so those are the way that risk is. So if you think about an enterprise grade RA, I mean, we've done those in a previous life, not in my CyberGuard life, because we're not a service level organization. But I've been involved in MSPs in my life, so I can tell you from my own experience that, I mean, I've done $500,000, $750,000 RAs,
Wow.
for national organizations that require physical inspections, and you've got to go in. So we did a 600 was a little more than 600 location bank, and we needed a statistically significant sampling of plant in order to make to extrapolate what the physical posture was. And so I think we visited nearly 100 branches. And so that's physical boots on the ground. I mean, do the math, right? At $3,000 a day plus T&E, it's not an inexpensive effort. So, but that's what RA is. It's an enterprise grade risk assessment. We've got a cyber resilience assessment in there as well, a ransomware readiness assessment in there as well, and that's really designed for MSPs and MSSPs and CCOs, frankly, to go in and do a serious due diligence assessment. More typically than not, they're obligated to some compliance regulation, like CMMC, like HIPAA, like ITAR, like DFAR, like CCP, like some larger regulatory um, requirement that demands that they do that level of assessment.
Well, let me ask you then. So the RA360, in terms of, let's say, CMMC, because I think
Mhm.
probably more often than not, MSPs get more clients that have CMMC requirements than a lot of others. I mean, HIPAA, sure, but I think a lot of people have kind of stopped, that, and they're more on the CMMC side. People are like, you know what, I'll take the HIPAA fine. I think is more what's happening on the smaller side. And then as you get a little larger, those practices are gobbled up into the bigger organizations. So it's really tough for those small medical practices, I think. But this on the CMMC side, so in RA360, do you have a specific
We do.
CMMC audit?
Yep, we
Okay,
do.
very
Specific
cool.
CMMC. I mean, it's CMMC 2.0. I mean,
Oh,
so it's the current version of that. Believe it or not, the single biggest vertical for which RAs are done is in financial services,
I could see that.
and that's because every state in the union and the federal government have requirements for financial services that include a risk assessments.
Yeah.
The very first one in the nation started in New York with the New York State Department of Financial Services Regulation 23 NYCRR 500. Sadly, I know that by heart. Um, and that was the very first cybersecurity regulation in the nation, and it mandated a risk assessment. And every state in the union has picked that. In Texas, it's Title VII, Part 4. Just every state requires it, and it Department of Financial Services is an interesting one. I don't mean just in New York, like all of the state financial divisions of those governments require it. Excuse me. And that's because the sensitive data they hold, and also because of the FTC regulations for safeguarding data, which is Section 314 of the, oh my God, Section 3. I know a lot about this stuff. I'm not even sure why. Requires that financial institutions have a risk assessment and do penetration tests and have a cyber policy for for um, for protecting consumer data. And so the lion's share of risk assessments, not just on our platform, but writ large, are for financial services organizations.
Well, so I would
even though
imagine
HIPAA's been around forever.
right? Yeah, exactly. So, this is not something that we've done really anything in. So, this is kind of interesting, and I think a lot of MSPs, is maybe a lot of the smaller ones at least, are probably in that a similar situation. So I'm curious, does this then open up, armed with, RA360, does this now open up a whole new branch of business, an entirely new revenue stream for the MSP, who could then say, because these companies, I'm sure, let's say that let's say it's a bank and they use some MSP, fine. Well, that MSP probably shouldn't also be doing the risk assessment as well. You can't, right? They're not auditing their own stuff. Be like, oh, we're doing great. Says who? Says us. Okay, that's great. I believe you. Um, right? So does this open up that door, as at least on the risk assessment side and the security side, to say, hey, look, independent third party risk assessment. Let's see how your current, provider and your current situation's doing. Is that something that you would use RA360 for?
So, I mean, you could certainly. So the risk assessment for the smaller, more traditional financial service. So think insurance companies and agencies. Think mortgage companies and brokers and title insurance companies, etc. They don't need an RA risk assessment because in the PG platform is also a risk assessment, and it's a NIST-based risk assessment. So that's perfectly suitable for those. I would say if you're sub 250 employees, sub 50 million in revenue, you could get away with that risk assessment in that's in PG. If you start going above that, or you have multiple, if you have more than a dozen branches, I would encourage you to look at RA as an assessment tool instead, because you'll tend to be audited by a larger, more powerful government body, and therefore they're going to want to see a more deliberate assessment.
So just to clarify there, not to interrupt you, but I suppose to interrupt you. So to interrupt you,
to do my job.
So would you say then on CMMC though, would you say RA360 for a CMMC? No.
Okay. CMMC, a whole different set of requirements, because CMMC has very specific questions. Well, let me restate that. So CMMC 2 has 3 levels of requirements, if you would, right? Maturity. Thank you. CMMC actually stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model. Yes, and so level 1, which is the self-assessment level, the PG risk assessment is perfectly fine for. Level 2, you should use the one in RA, and that's because if you're a level 2, you are at or near the prime contractor level, and they are going to want to see a more deliberate risk assessment that go through the 110 controls of NIST 171. And so that's why you're going to, for those that need level 2, you should use RA. For those that don't need level 2, they need level 1 to self-assess. And nobody should self-assess, by the way. They should always have a third party do it. Strongly encourage that. And any MSP could do that, by the way. If they just, and maybe I'll actually do a webinar on how they can do it, because I think I think they're just afraid of it, and they don't understand that they actually can do it. So to get back to your question, is there an opportunity? Yes, there's an opportunity. I mean, there are Well, first of all, I don't subscribe to the belief that you shouldn't audit yourself,
Of course.
because as long as you're honest, then you should.
Mhm.
If you're not, you shouldn't. And that doesn't mean that those who don't aren't honest. But the reason is that by doing an assessment, you become liable if you're also doing the work.
Mhm.
And so I discourage MSPs from doing their own assessments if they look in the mirror and say, all right, I might shave here and there. If you're shaving here and there, you should not do your own assessment. And that's because you become liable, right? You said this, I got an assessment that said you're doing it, and now Mr. CEO will sue you, and you did this circular firing squad that you created for yourself is going to shoot you in the rear end.
Yeah.
And so, and again, that doesn't mean that if you're using a third party, you're dishonest. It merely, because there are people like you that believe that you shouldn't do your own, and I get that completely. I just, what in my MSP life, I looked in the mirror and I gave, when I did a risk assessment and came back with a crappy score, I said, listen, we dropped the ball. That's it. We dropped the ball, and here's what we're doing to fix it. But not everybody does that,
Yeah.
and so anyway, having said that, it's a tremendous opportunity for MSPs who feel confident in their ability to provide cyber compliance services to go out there and assess other. I mean, in my other life in the MSP, we have hundreds of clients that have other MSPs as their providers that we provide cybersecurity compliance services for, because those IT providers don't understand the regulations well enough to be able to counsel their clients. And so yes, it's a huge opportunity, but the whole thing is a huge opportunity for MSPs, either for an MSP to be a third party for another MSP, or a third party to actually go ahead and
100%. Yeah, not a problem. I was kind of seeing it more as not the should you not audit your own stuff. I think you absolutely should, so you know where you're at. You should definitely assess your own stuff. Make sure that you're doing your clients a service, not a disservice.
right.
But at the same time, without necessarily even going and let's say taking a business from a competitor or friend or anything, you can go out and offer those third party assessments. Look, we don't want your business. We're just going to do this. And it's interesting because I got, clients who came to us just for that. They were, they're in another country and I don't want that business. I don't want their IT business. And, because their employees speak another language, primarily. But they've got a local, IT, but they wanted that third party, assessment. Where do
Yep.
we really stand? How are things? So, I see that as a whole nother revenue stream to say, for my
Totally.
MSP to say, look, we've got this whole area that we can do for you in security for auditing and assessing, and pen testing is a great part of that. And so
Oh yeah,
that
definitely agree. As I said, in Absolute Logic has hundreds of clients. Almost all of them have their own IT providers. All it provides is cyber compliance services. That includes pen tests and risk assessments and policies and all of that goes into it. And because a
basically
lot of MSPs don't, yes, basically that.
basically CyberGuard360.
Correct. And the MSPs don't want to do that because cyber compliance is scary.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
scary.
let me ask you this, because I think we've got a pretty good overview of CyberGuard 360. Still going to hit you up on OB, but but let's go into speaking of scary. Where do you see coming down the pike in terms of compliance, and what from your perspective, what's the future hold? What should people be looking forward, looking at down the road? What should we be preparing for to yeah Let's go with that. What should we be preparing for?
For cyber compliance or cyber compliance?
Well, let's say cyber compliance.
Awesome. No, because what I was going to say is they're actually converging. Your cybersecurity, even though it was all the rage 8 years ago, right? Like everybody, like you got to get into cybersecurity. I mean, entire marketing companies change their marketing strategy. IT service marketing companies change their marketing strategy around creating campaigns around cybersecurity. The reality is that about really a year ago, there's been a significant convergence between security and compliance. So much so that I suspect within the next 36 months, probably significantly less than that, but let's say 36 months, cybersecurity will be cyber compliance. And the reason I say that is there's really two factors that have been driving. There's three factors that have been driving that. But one is a subset of the other. So at the 300,000 foot level, you have government. And from the federal government and in other countries, their national governments, down to the state governments, they are all enacting cybersecurity compliance regulation. Well, actually, they've all enacted some form of a cybersecurity compliance regulation. They tend to be narrowly confined to some verticals, but they are expanding the verticals. New York State, every business has to comply with the SHIELD Act. California, every business has to comply with CCPA. In between the bookends of the country, you've got more narrow verticals, but invariably they're all going to adopt the same regulations, and every business is going to have to be in it. So that's the first piece. The second, so that's that 300,000 foot level. At a 30,000 foot level, you've got CMMC. CMMC obligates every single business involved in the DoD supply chain. So that's from prime contractors like Lockheed to the cleaning company that cleans the subcontractor of the subcontractor of the subcontractor of the subcontractor, right? Has to be CMMC compliant. That accounts for 2.6% of our economy, or $550 billion in commerce a year. And so that's a significant number of businesses that are going to be audited. That's the difference between like New York Shield and CCPA. There's no teeth in those. CMMC has teeth. And what the government did, which is really smart, the DoD did was smart, is they didn't say, listen, the DoD is going to come in and audit you. They said, no, we're going to audit the prime contractor. And the prime contractor better make sure every sub has been audited. And so they've pushed the audit to the prime, and the prime pushes it down the supply chain. It's a brilliant move by the DoD. And so every one of those businesses is going to get audited in one form or fashion or be liable. Because there's no way a Lockheed or a Boeing or you name them are going to lose a $250 billion contract because some schmuck in a truck who services AC, no disrespect to the AC servicing community out there, hooked up his laptop that didn't have security controls, infected the sub, who infected the sub, and infected this, and got to the prime, and all of a sudden something went sideways. And so that's the second thing. But the big, and as big as all that is, the biggest thing is now you've got the private sector enforcing cyber compliance. And what happened last year, and this is where it gets really interesting, really, really fast. That's why I said 36 months. I'm certain it's going to be significantly less than that, but 36 months at the outside. You've got the insurance market now saying to businesses today, if you want business loss insurance, not cyber liability, business loss insurance, and you want that coverage if you suffer an outage because of a breach, you have to have these cyber controls. And if you don't, we don't pay you. That's a huge change in the economic landscape for businesses. Because today, if you look at a breach today, unfortunately, I also know a little bit about insurance. So if you look at what happens in a breach today, if a breach takes one of your customers out, assuming they have cyber liability, they'll get some money for that. That will cover forensics, that will cover cleanup, that will cover. It's not going to cover loss of income. That's your business loss coverage under your property and casualty, right? So that piece of insurance is what's saying, hey, you want us to cover your lost revenue? To do that, you need these elements of cyber. And every business is all of a sudden they're having an oh shit moment that says, what am I going to do? Now they don't read their deck pages. And so we MSPs have an obligation to go out there and say, hey, let me see your deck page. You see this? You need this. This is not me selling you what you don't need. You're going to get ransomware. And when that happens, these guys ain't paying you.
Actually, that's a really great point. I mean, who's ever even thought to go in and be like, hey, let's go ahead and look at your policy, make sure we've got what you need in order to be covered, because it's starting to happen more and more where there's, business email compromise, you're not even your client, your client's, a partner. They got their email got hacked, and then suddenly a ton of money is in the wrong hands, and everybody's like, it was you. It's your fault. Okay. Then it comes down to insurance and legal. And that's a great point about the insurance. I mean,
another huge opportunity.
Huge opportunity.
I know.
You literally go to all of your clients. Okay.
Every business.
I'm taking notes. Oh, wait, I'm recording this. Never mind. So, I mean, but for every
You're
MSP,
welcome.
I mean, that's a really great thing for one, not just the MSP, but also
it's great
the
for
client.
them.
It's great for them because when it happens, you don't want to be like sticking your head in the sand and then suddenly, something's wiped out your whole body. And that's what's gonna happen if somebody's not reading the fine print. It's funny because I saw earlier today, interestingly, because we've got a client who, again, it was their partner who, there was an issue and they're like, who's to blame? And we're looking at some stuff, and it's interesting how these insurance companies, you got to read the fine print as to exactly, was this social engineering? Was this a technical a hack? And depending on how they're defining those, how this thing plays out, you really got to read the fine print and give it some actual thought, beyond 100%. Just making sure that you're doing the proper, things cyber wise. Otherwise, they're just like, oh, you didn't do this. We're not covering it anyway. So
exactly.
Bye.
Exactly. Because they're in the business to make money. They make money by not paying.
Yep.
They collect premiums and don't pay. That's literally their job in life. And I respect that. Listen, they're betting it's never going to happen. You're betting it is, so you pay. And they're betting if it does, that you probably didn't read the fine print. So the likelihood of them paying approach zero. And so that's why I said cyber compliance is where that convergence is. And I think it's happening at a pace that almost nobody is paying attention to. And I've been watching this for the last year. I mean, I started talking about this, not that I'm smarter than anybody. Again, I just have my fingers in a lot of pie. And I started talking about this last August when I saw the traveler's application for insurance. And I'm like, holy crap, there's 12 things in there that are squarely in the realm of cyber. And this looks exactly like two of the regulations I know, which means everybody's drawing down off the safeguard language in the FTC. And that's what's happening. And so cyber compliance, trust me, if you bet on anything, bet on that. The only thing left to talk about is Orange Box.
The Orange Box.
Orange Box.
OB. You're son welcome. Of a bitch. That's nice.
So I'll tell you the story about Orange Box, and that's actually what OB stands for, bud.
Hysterical.
So as we were building these tools, and the team was really operating in secrecy. And because we were trying a bunch of different things as we're building our pen testing tool and our vulnerability assessment. And Chris, and there's a lot of stuff in there that just, it's basically a black box. And so that's what we started calling it, was black box. And Steven, my partner, is a pilot.
Yeah.
And the black
Great.
box in an airplane is orange.
That's great.
So they can find it in a crash.
That's right.
And so that's how it got to be named Orange Box.
Fantastic. Well, you know what? That is as good a place to end this as ever. All right. I tell you, Al, I think people know where to find you, but if you could tell people where they can find out more about you and what you do.
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to look me up, Al Alper. CyberGuard360.com. That's our webpage. We're a cybersecurity SaaS solution for IT service providers for them to offer to their clients. And like all SaaS companies, we're on a subscription basis. And so MSPs subscribe to us, and they offer bits, pieces, and or all of our platform to their customers. And if you're an MSP, check us out. We'd love to have you. If you're a business owner and you work with an IT company, turn them on to it. If you don't, you should be using CyberLink, and he'll deploy our solution for you. And he didn't ask me to make him that commercial, by the way. So.
That's right. No, I didn't, but I appreciate it. And no, to anybody who's not, you definitely check out CyberGuard360. We use it, love it. It's great for our clients. It's fantastic all the way around. All right, Al, it has been a pleasure having you on today. Until next time.
Pleasure's all mine, sir.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.